My guest today is probably the only person in Australian rock music who isn't able to make a comeback, simply because he's never been away. His career spans more than 50 years, and Ross Wilson remains one of this country's most respected artists, with bands including Daddy Cool and Mondo Rock, as a solo artist or as a songwriter of classics like Eagle Rock. Ross Wilson's success has continued unabated for decades, both locally and globally. As you're about to hear, he's an enigmatic and enthusiastic character with a bunch of terrific stories to share. Ross Wilson, thank you so much for your time today. I am being inundated with requests from my listeners asking to hear from you, so I'm really excited to spend a little bit of time with you.
Great.
You've been going since 1964, haven't you? Could you fill us in on how it all started for you?
Well, it all started when I got myself a harmonica and I started like copying old blues records and things. And that's how I got into my first band. I was still at school. This other guy came up to me and they said, "Hey, we like what you're doing there. Can you sing?" And I said, "Yes, I can sing." And suddenly I was in a band. And we started making records. When we put out our first single, and all the kids in the neighborhood bought it and it got on the charts. So that was great. It was a version of the much recorded song Louie Louie, and the band's name was the Pink Finks.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the music scene was like back then?
Well, it was quite good in many ways that you don't have now. The main one being that there were lots and lots and lots of places to play. There were dances everywhere, teenage dances. Of course, it was before the licensing laws in our hometown of Melbourne were quite strict. So they had what was called 6 o'clock closing, all the pubs closed at 6. And so all of these dances, there was no alcohol or anything like that. It all changed when they loosened up the laws and it was 10 o'clock closing and the music started to move from dance halls into pubs.
At the time, teenagers, 15, 16-year-olds, probably even people younger than that, were going along to see bands play. You simply went along to have a dance and listen to the music.
Have a dance, have a good time, yeah. And those places that get crowded out, there was like just fantastic. And I mean, they had all the same sort of complaints from old people then. Oh, there'll be trouble and all that. But there's more trouble now because the kids have got nowhere to go.
Yeah. So you cut your teeth in those first dance halls. By 1966, you formed a band called The Party Machine. How did that one come about?
So we were happening in the 1965. We released 4 singles, but then everyone was starting to leave school, me included. I had to go get a job, and the lineup changed. And the big change was we started to write our own songs. And so the Party Machine became the new band, and their principal thing was that we were going to write as much original material as possible, which we did. And, some of it was great, some of it was terrible. Myself and Ross Hannaford on guitar, who had been with the Pink Finks with me. And on bass, we had a New Zealand guy called Mike Rudd. He went on to form Spectrum. When I left to go to England, Mike Rudd formed Spectrum. When I came back, I formed Daddy Cool. And both of those bands had #1 hits with their own self-written material. So that all came out of the Party Machine. They're a very important band.
Spectrum was a very well-known band here in Australia, wasn't it? Mike Rudd still plays around town today.
Yeah, #1 hit with I'll Be Gone.
Ross, what did you learn about songwriting at the time?
Well, what I learned by the time I went off to England, I went over there on the invitation of another band that had gone there, and they were having a lineup change. They wanted a front guy, and they thought I could fit the bill. So
an Australian band?
Yeah, and I went called Procession, and so I went off over there and sang with them, and we played big places like the Marquee Club and various things, but they were falling apart by the time I went there, so I was just kind of a stopgap thing. But I had a great time. And trekked back across the world with no money, all through Asia and the Middle East, all these places you can't go now, By the time I got back to Australia about a year later, I had a whole lot of ideas about what I wanted to do, and that's how Daddy Cool eventually came about by the end of 1970. Yeah.
So what was the idea behind Daddy Cool? What did you learn?
What I'd learned is one idea, one song. So Daddy Cool was all about like bringing it back to basics. I was experimenting with old R&B. I was investigating old rhythm and blues and doo-wop music, 4-piece harmonies, bass voice, which Ross Hannaford was able to provide. So we were having fun, you know. It was just a side project, and I didn't expect it to take off, but it took off straight away. So we went with the flow, you know. But it was all about being simple. Just, you know, concentrate on the rhythm and write nice, simple songs, and everybody have a good time and get on the dance floor and dance around. And that's what happened.
Where did you get the name Daddy Cool from?
Well, I just sort of came out of thin air. I don't think I pinched it from anywhere. I just seemed to think it was the right name for what we were doing. However, there was this young guy that lived around the corner. He said, "Oh, Ross, what are you doing?" Because would rehearse in my back room. He goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I got this new thing called Daddy Cool. You know, we're going to play nice old doo-wop songs and have a rocking good time." He goes, "Oh, Daddy Cool. Oh, you got your name from that old song?" And I said, "Nah, what is it?" He ran home, pulled out this old single and brought it to me. And it was the Diamonds. And I knew the A side, which was Silhouettes, because that was a hit. And on the flip side was his other song called Daddy Cool. And I played it and I went, wow, that's great. So we immediately learned that as our theme song. But the name came first, and then I learned about the song. That was fate.
You became known personally as Daddy Cool, didn't you?
Well, sort of, yeah. The front guy always gets most of the attention, but no, it was the whole band was Daddy Cool. You know, I wasn't actually going around, "I'm Mr. Daddy Cool."
You were pretty cool though.
Yeah.
I seem to recall.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you're still pretty cool. I'm chatting with Ross Wilson from Daddy Cool and a whole lot of different bands post that. What happened with Daddy Cool?
Daddy Cool actually was 4 members from this larger group I had called Sons of the Vegetal Mother, which was a much more experimental band. One time at one of these dances, we got up and played as Daddy Cool as well. And lo and behold, like in that era, there was a thing called progressive rock, and there was like people play long guitar solos, and people would sit on the floor and just listen to it and then clap and all that. When Daddy Cool came on, they all jumped up and started dancing. It was like, oh, this is what we've been waiting for. You know, we're going to be, they're all bouncing off the walls from the first gig. So the word went out that there's this exciting new group. You know, people danced to them even, you know. All over that summertime, we sort of took over Melbourne. We were playing everywhere, all the dances. And then suddenly we were headlining. We hadn't even put a record out. We were headlining. And this local record company came along. And the producer was Robbie Porter, who I knew as Robbie G. He'd been a child prodigy. He had a lot of hits. And he said, "I'll produce you and we're going to take you to America," because I live in America all the time. I said, that spoke to me because I'd been to England with that band that I mentioned before. And I realized all the bands in England were trying to get to America, you know, because that's where the money was. So when he said that, I said, well, that sounds good. So we signed with them, and it turned out he was a very good producer. And he produced the Daddy Cool recordings, including Eagle Rock.
The Daddy Cool classic Eagle Rock was a national #1 in Australia for 10 weeks in 1971 and charted again in 1986 and then again in 1990. It was Eagle Rock that influenced the writing of Elton John's Crocodile Rock.
We only spent 2.5 days making that album.
Wow.
And he took the tapes off to Los Angeles, and he had it mixed by a guy there, mixed the whole album there. And so unusually for that time, we came out with an album. We did what everyone does now, which is like record an album first, put out the single. Eagle Rock became #1. Then they released the album. That became #1. So it worked really, really well. Less than a year after we formed, we were in LA doing a showcase at the Whiskey A Go-Go, trying to get a record deal there, which we did.
You couldn't have in your wildest dreams imagined that could actually come to fruition, could you?
Oh, well, when you're young, you do think about that. Because things happen a lot faster when you're young, I can tell you that. If you listen to Eagle Rock a lot alongside the other songs that were coming out of Australia, it sounds different because of the way it was mixed. There's hardly any reverb, any kind of echo. It's just the guys in the room playing, you know. It really captured that really well and showed what the dynamic we had as a group.
Can you share a little bit about how Eagle Rock came about and what was it? I mean, you said that the music of Daddy Cool made everybody get up and dance. You managed to energize everybody. What was it about that music that got them up and dancing rather than sitting on their
Well,
bums and clapping?
Eagle Rock's an interesting song, the way it's put together. I actually started writing it when I was in England at that time, and I came up with the original riff. It's funky. It goes. That's very ragtime.
Right.
So it's like pre-Second World War Mississippi blues was the influence there. It's pulling you in different ways. The
And it makes you move.
So you've got the tension of the verses, and then suddenly, hey, 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 it's got all this release. The good old Eagle Rock's here to stay. I saw a picture in the Sunday Times of an article about the blues while I'm writing that song. And I'm going, oh, that's interesting. And there's a picture of these black people in a juke joint, and they're going like this and that. You know, it's a very evocative. And it said they were cutting the pigeon wing and doing the Eagle Rock. So the picture was sort of came from the same place as the influence of the music, you know. And I'm going, and we'll do the Eagle Rock. And I'm going, that's what I'll do with this song. I'll probably do a song about people dancing and having a good time and doing the Eagle Rock. I mean, I didn't know what the movement was of the Eagle Rock. But anyway, that's how it all evolved. So I had the riff and I had the Eagle Rock and a couple of odd lyrics. But then I had to leave England and make this journey, as I said, through Europe and hitchhiking home, no money. But when I got back to Melbourne, I had access to a guitar again. I'm going, this song needs a chorus, right? So then I came up with it. Hey, hey, good old Eagle Rocks. What other chord do I know? Oh, G. Here to stay, and the morning just gaze about the way we move. Doing the Eagle Rock. So I had a whole song then. Yeah. I was basically using the 4 chords I knew. Then we go into on the record, we go into the so-called solo section, which is basically just, we play the riff, we just hammer on that riff, you know. So the whole thing about Eagle Rock is just grind that riff into the ground. Fortunately, as fate would have it, I had found the right people. To make that song work required that band, those other 3 guys, because I tell you, I've heard a lot of bad versions of Eagle Rock. It's not that easy to play unless you're Daddy Cool.
Daddy Cool really was one hell of a band, and the song Eagle Rock rewrote the books for Australian pop music. It stayed at number 1 nationally for 8 weeks and was the best-selling Australian single of 1971. Want to hear more about Daddy Cool? Don't move. Daddy Cool was originally a side project for Ross Wilson until the band exploded onto the Australian scene in late 1970. Their 50s style rock and roll had everyone up and dancing, and their debut album, Daddy Who, Daddy Cool, spawned another mega hit in Come Back Again. That song went gold within a month.
There were a lot of theatrics on stage that went hand in hand, weren't there?
We had a lot of fun because Ross Hannaford, he was still at art school, and he had all his art school friends. They'd go, oh, we love the band, it's great. Here, put this on. They gave me these little ears, like to wear on my head, and a foxtail. So I pinned the foxtail on the back, and I had the beard there, and so I looked like a feral fox or something, you know. It was pretty funny.
You guys were having a ball.
Yeah, so we just put on whatever they gave us, you know, and go out on stage and be as silly as we possibly could.
Daddy Cool took their outrageous antics and costumes and their old-time rock and roll to America, where they were also greeted with enthusiastic audiences.
To crack America, you really have to keep going back there. And we went there 3 times, and it was sort of happening. In a couple of places, there was a few places that showed us what could happen. We played in one place called Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it was with an early version of Fleetwood Mac, and we went over like a great, you know. So a few months later, we're back there to promote our second album, and we were number 1 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And they said the TV station down to interview us, and we were headlining that same room like a few months later. And it was kind of like, wow, we're number 1 in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
So why didn't you keep touring it through the States?
Well, there was a couple of reasons, and one was, even though I had a lot of fun doing Daddy Cool, it wasn't like I wanted to do retro stuff for the rest of my life. And I felt I wanted to go back to the essence of what I was doing with, say, the Party Machine or Sons of Thieves and Mother, which is writing contemporary material. Yes, Eagle Rock was contemporary, but the other sort of framework of Daddy Cool was a 50s kind of thing.
Just before we leave Eagle Rock, it's celebrating its 50th anniversary, albeit a little bit late because of COVID. Are you aware, and my kids only made me aware of it recently, that even today when Eagle Rock is played at a celebration like a wedding or an engagement, all the guys drop their pants?
Yeah, this is something happened over the last 30 years or so. I don't know where it started.
It's quite an insane practice. I was horrified when I just found out fairly recently, and I've instructed my daughter who's getting married this coming December that she's not to play it.
You keep your undies on, just the pants around your ankles. It's sort of like the uncle putting the lampshade on his head at the party or something.
And it's only the guys, not the girls.
Well, girls have been known to like whip up their bras and whip them around.
Is that right? Yeah. But how does that feel for you? You've started a whole new ongoing tradition.
Well, I didn't start it. I don't know how the Australian public came up with that, and now it's all over the place. It's big in like at 21st, like you mentioned. It's big in the military, at military colleges. You go to Duntroon or something, and you graduate and you become an officer. The other guys find out you didn't drop your pants. You sent to Coventry.
You're in trouble. That only happens here in Australia, though, doesn't it? Maybe the Americans will catch on to it too, now that we're telling them about it.
Well, if you go onto YouTube, you can find things about some Americans that are going, I was in Australia, and look what happened when they played this song. It's like, so it is all over the place. But I look at it as an expression of like the silliness of Daddy Cool. Yeah. And this to me seems a good response, and we can claim it for ourselves, just like the Australian public came up with, am I ever going to see your face again? No way, etc., etc., etc.
That's right. Well, you certainly put the fun into music in that era for sure. That song became Australia's all-time champion #1 rock anthem and still is today. Everyone knows the words to it.
It's up to about 50 million streams on Spotify alone, so that's
amazing. It's just a shame that you as an artist don't get more for each stream.
That's right.
Yeah. While you had Daddy Cool, you then started producing albums for another incredible Australian group called Skyhooks.
Well, how that happened was, when I mentioned I had a band called Mighty Kong. Well, we went for about a year, and one of the last shows we did, and we knew we were going to break up, was at Melbourne Uni. And the support band was this band, Skyhooks. They had everything I liked. They were kind of a bit weird. They were funny, and they were taking the mickey out of things in their songs. They were socially kind of satirical and all of that. And all of that appealed to me. And I went up to them just before we played. I said, who wrote those songs? Because I could tell there was a couple of good songs in there. This guy here, the bass player, he writes those songs. I went, oh, cool. Hey, I really like what you're doing. Why don't you come around and have a chat to my house? Here, give me a call. And he came around and I said, I'm starting a new publishing company. I don't like the way publishing's handled it. I'll give you this better deal. And no one had offered him anything. And I signed him up to this new company called Doodah Music. And then the lineup changed very quickly in that band, and they got better almost overnight. And so every time I went to see them, they were better. I'm going, this is great. So we started doing demos with them. And as a publisher, I'm thinking, I've got to get these songs out there. I became a bit obsessed with the whole thing. So over about a year, and then the lead singer left. And Greg McCain's the bass player, songwriter, he said, I know this other guy who used to work, his name's Graham Strong. So they got him in. I went to see them play, and I went, whoa, we're here. This guy could sing. He was good looking. He was cheeky. He was fantastic. And I said, I want to produce him because I know exactly, I can hear it all. So we go into the studio, and I said to the record company, I'll produce it, but you're not allowed to censor them. And that's exactly what we did. We went in and recorded Skyhooks and all their cheekiness and their social comment and the way they sounded like no other band, and came out and boom, blew Daddy's Cool's records out of the water. And that was the start of the whole explosion. It started with Daddy Cool. Skyhooks took it to the next level, and from that time on, people were like, your Midnight Oils and Chisels and all that was starting to sell hundreds of thousands of albums.
Right. Which was your favourite Skyhooks tune?
I'm really fond on a couple of levels of the song "Ego's Not a Dirty Word." As a single, it's perfect, and everything is important, and all the things that you can hear make sense.
Ross Wilson, talking about censorship, if we could go back a minute, it's when you had the band The Party Machine,
Yeah,
and you published a lyric book. Tell us what happened to that.
well, I think it was around '68. We were writing all our new material and sort of singing it, and I go, well, how are we going to get this across? Oh, let's do a songbook, and we'll just give the songbook away at dances. So we printed up a bunch of those, and we'd like give them away. And then our manager gave some to Go Set to.
That was our national music magazine.
Yeah,
at the
so
time, wasn't it?
they were putting free ones in. They'd stick in a Party Machine songbook, and some of the lyrics. Her mother got a hold of this and went, "What's this?" And there was songs about "I don't believe all your kids should be virgins" was one of the songs, and there was another one that was sort of about sadism and all kind of stuff. I mean, kind of silly stuff you do when you're young. And so a mother complained to the cops. In that era, Melbourne had a vice squad. The Victorian police had this thing called the vice squad, which would go around censoring people and making sure they didn't do the wrong thing, and that's a pornographic film, or shut down the street walkers or whatever. The
moral police, right?
Yeah, moral police. It included like what you could print. I didn't get charged with anything, which is great. I went off to England, and the publishers of it, who'd printed it, they got charged. And Go said they got charged. I come back, and it's months and months apart, ages, and I finally get back, and the case still hasn't come to court. I'd been away for 9 months or something. And it goes to court, and the magistrate, he goes looking through it, and he's going, well, it's not really obscene, he's going. But to please the vice squad, he said, destroy them.
We were back to burning the books.
The best thing was, it was on the front page of Truth and stuff as well. There was all kinds of stuff, seditious songbook.
Which made it much more in demand.
Yeah, so we had a lot of publicity. So it taught me, hey, it's not that bad getting banned, we got the most publicity we've ever had. So Skyhooks comes along, and I'm going, you can't censor them. And they get, I think, 6 out of the 11 songs on that Living in the 70s album, you couldn't play on commercial radio because they had a code of conduct. But Horror Movie was a big hit. Everyone wants the album. You can't hear all the songs on the radio because half of them are banned. Oh, that sounds great. So that was like, it really helped the album. You had to get the album to hear those songs.
Again, that old adage, any publicity is good publicity, isn't it?
Banning. Yes.
So from Skyhooks, you became renowned as the go-to producer, and you started producing Jojo Zepp's first 2 albums for Joe Camilleri, as well as Stephen Cummings' group, The Sports.
Getting those guys into the studio, they were sort of contemporaries of mine. Joe, he's the same age. We came up through the ranks together, and I saw he was getting good at playing the horn, and he could sing, and he sat in with Daddy Cool a couple of times. And I'm going, we want to make a record. So the first thing we did a Christmas record. And that's where he came up with the name Jojo Zepp, which is basically, his name's Joe, and in Malta, where his family came from, Joe is Giuseppe. So Joe Giuseppe, sort of like ZZ Top, but Jojo Zepp had a meaning as well. That was quite clever, I thought. And we did Run Run Rudolph, a Chuck Berry song, and put that out as a single. And then he had to start going out and promote it. So we put a band together. What he did was, my wife at the time, she could sing and everything. She had a band called The Marvels. Joe Camilleri basically took that band, and they started doing some promotional gigs, and then he started to get more popular, and so that band became his band. And
during this time that you're busy producing, you're obviously not making your own music, or not too much of it. It gets to about 1977, and you decide to form another band called Mondo Rock.
Yeah, well, when I was producing those Joe Camilleri albums, the Jojo Zepp albums, I was in cahoots with Glenn Wheatley, as most people would have heard of. He was managing the Little River Band, and he wanted to start a record company, and he had the backing of EMI. He said, Ross, let's form a record company together, because you're done Skyhooks, and I can tell you're a good producer, blah, blah, blah. I knew him anyway. And so we did that. But time went by, and I realized, producing's not my really, I have to be really into the act to produce them, e.g. Skyhooks. Otherwise, it's kind of boring, And what I really like doing is performing. So, let's get a new thing together. And I'd put out one of the tracks, things that came out on the record company, which was called Oz Records, was a song called Living in the Land of Oz. I'd done a soundtrack for a movie called Oz. So that was big at the time. And I had to go out and promote that single. And the agent said, "Oh, what are you going to call the band, Ross?" And I said, "Oh, I'll call it Ross Wilson's Mondo Rock." And that's how Mondo Rock came about. So for a while it was Ross Wilson's Mondo Rock, and then after a while we got more popular and known, and it just became Mondo Rock, and we started putting out records of our own.
Living in the Land of Oz, released in 1976 for the soundtrack of Australia's first rock movie, Oz, was a song that championed Aboriginal rights. It was one of countless hits that Ross Wilson scored during the dozen or so years that Mondo Rock kept pushing out punchy, lively adult pop rock. Both the Australian charts and Aussie audiences were enriched and enlivened by what Ross had to offer between 1977 and 1991. Don't go anywhere, much more to come. I'm chatting to one of Australia's most iconic performers. He's musician, songwriter and producer Ross Wilson, who even after more than 50 years still manages to wow audiences everywhere.
After forming Mondo Rock, you put out several albums with them, and again, you're on top of the charts with songs like Cool World, State of the Heart, Chemistry, Summer of '81. You could do no wrong at Ross Wilson.
We had about 10 years of really big success, you know. The band went, it's the longest band I've ever had. That went for 15 years all together. Sometimes we still get together occasionally, yeah. That was a real growth period for me because I'd come out of Daddy Cool was very kind of all that simple kind of early stuff. I was only 23 at the time. By the time Mondo Rock hit in a big way, I'd turned 30 and I was more mature, and the music was more mature too. I got Eric McCusker into the band because he was a great songwriter and a good guitarist. So he was providing lots and lots of really good songs. I was providing some good songs. You know, I wasn't quite as prolific as him. But it was a good balance between, I had sort of had a certain brashness to what I did, and he had a much more sophisticated kind of melodic sense. And so between the two of us, we got this good balance happening. We wrote a few songs together as well. And so Mondo Rock was a great band.
Is there one Mondo Rock song that's closest to your heart?
Well, of the songs that I wrote, I'd say Cool World. I Had Eagle Rock, that's my perennial. Come Said the Boy, that's Eric McCusker's. In fact, he got contacted by Keith Urban earlier, about 6 months ago, saying, "Listen, Eric, I tracked you down and I've been listening to the guitar solo on Come Said the Boy," because Keith Urban's a pretty good guitarist.
Yeah.
And I got to say, that's one of the greatest things I've ever heard. Come Said the Boy, which was overall probably the most best remembered of Mondo Rock songs. It still gets played all the time on the radio. So Keith Urban, big fan of Come Said the Boy.
What was Eric writing about in that song, do you know?
Well, Eric grew up mainly in Bronte. His father was
in
a
Sydney,
physicist, and they had a really cute little house on top of a cliff, an unimpeded view of the ocean, the waves and Bronte Beach. So he was sort of beach people, girls on the beach, you know, like Tamarama with topless girls and all of that kind of stuff. And so that was sort of speaking about his teenage years. And he's told me that it's fictitious, but it sort of draws on about 3 different events that happened. And one of them was like he fancied this girl and she was a bit older than him, you know, and various things that he constructed this interesting song about it. And I think one of the things is it really touched a nerve with the Australian public because like about 80% of the population of Australia lives on the coast, you know, or close to the coast.
Right.
And that whole thing of like summertime and, you know, your first girlfriend or boyfriend and the beach and all of that really speaks to everybody back then and still does.
After that period of time, what brought Mondo Rock down?
The band took a while to get going, but it started, the very first time was in 1976 and then sporadically, and then by 78, 79 we brought out our first album. So from 79 to 90 we had a series of albums, we had a lot of hits, but then, you know, your use by date kind of came up. We had a pretty good run. I'd brought out a solo album in 89 because I was feeling a bit kind of restless, and the the final Mondo Rock album was 1990, but by that stage it was just me and Eric.
Right.
It just sort of a natural kind of attrition there, yeah.
Right. And your solo career has continued to date, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, in the 90s, after Mondo Rock, I had a divorce, and I was, living alone most of the time. But I was also had a few, other relationships along the way before I got married again in the late 90s, and we started to have kids. But in that, mainly during the 90s, I was writing with other people. And this was a new thing because John Farnham had a big hit with the Mondo Rock song, A Touch of Paradise. And so people were going, oh, gee, wouldn't mind writing with you. And so I was writing songs with Jimmy Barnes, and 3 albums of his that I've got songs on from around that period, early 90s. And he was selling tons of records. So I was having pretty good success with John Farnham, Barnesy. I went on some writing trips over to France and America, and I learned a lot about, writing with like all these other professional guys. And so I was like honing my skills and learning a lot. And because I was living by myself, I didn't sort of need to go out on the road. I was doing another thing.
Yeah.
But then when I got married again and I had another couple of kids, I was like, well, I better get back to work. and I started performing again and putting out a few more solo albums. And that's been great. I mean, I really got into like the whole live thing again. And, I think I've matured as a performer, as an entertainer, and I just love playing. So it's great.
You're one of very few Australians who's never taken any major time off, have you? You've virtually been a performer since you started in 1964.
Pretty much. I mean, I've been very, very, very lucky. I mean, I haven't had like huge international success. A few overseas artists have. Joe Cocker recorded a song of mine about 9 years ago.
Which one was that?
I Come in Peace, which was the title track of a solo album I had. Sadly, he passed away soon after, but it was his final single. And he was huge in Europe still, and massive in Germany. So that was a platinum album with that song on it in Germany, and that song got played all on radio all throughout Europe.
Uh-huh.
And to have an artist of his stature to record your song is great, As an individual performer, I'm not really known outside Australia. There are a few fans, but despite that, I've been able to make a very good living and have a good career, just, mainly playing in Australia, doing things here, unimpeded since Daddy Cool, since 1971. So that's pretty good. I mean, either as a producer or a songwriter or performer, music publisher.
I think it's better than pretty good. I think it's damn good.
Yeah.
You've got a lot to be very proud of yourself for. And the fact that a lot of people outside of this country may not have heard your music is just the way the industry was, I suppose. If it had been today and you were handled by a label, they would have taken you out to the world instantly, wouldn't they?
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, we had a stab at it, But the thing is, I'm really grateful for the way things have gone. And as far as being known in other countries, it's sort of like that everywhere, really. I mean, you might be big in Japan, but no one knows you're here, Same,
Yeah, right.
You might be big in Germany, but what's the matter in Australia, So everyone's got their own, local scene going. And some, I'm just very lucky, and I've got some new recordings that have done an EP, another.
So you're still writing and recording today?
Yeah, I've got plenty of songs, yeah.
Ross's new EP is his first new music in a long 13 years. It's called She's Stuck on Facebook All the Time, and I think lots of us living in this modern age might find that song quite easy to relate to.
Anything left on your bucket list other than to just keep going the way you're going?
That's a good question. Well, I think I just want to get another album down, That's the main focus at the moment. Play a lot of festivals, have a good time, It's great playing. I've got really great guys I play with. The lineup shifts a little bit, but from here now, but they're all great players, and so that makes life very easy. I don't have to worry about whether one guy's not a good player or not.
Yeah, right.
They're all great. So.
And you still get really energized by performing, even at 75. Yeah. You can do it like you did it when you were 25.
Well, I think it's really good for me mentally and health-wise. The whole thing, it keeps you fit. I mean, I go to the gym and I've got to stay fit, and I'd lift weights and all that kind of stuff that most people when they're 75 don't do.
Well, you got to do it if you want to stay stage fit, don't you?
Yeah, I'm hoping to stay together, you know, in one piece for quite a while.
Awesome. Ross Wilson, you are definitely the king of cool in this country, and probably a lot more once they get to know more about you. And I dare say that will happen over time anyway. Thank you so much for chatting with us today. It's just been a pleasure getting to know more about your life and career.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Sandy. Thank you.
Thanks a million for talking with me today, Ross. I really appreciate your time.
Bye-bye.
See you now. Bye.
Ross Wilson there, who's had a career spanning nearly 6 decades, issued over 45 singles and EPs, 17 of which hit the top 40, and released 25 albums. Not a bad innings really, is it? Ross is also touring again, so check out his website rosswilson.com.au to see if he's coming to a town near you. If he is, do yourself a favour and go and see him. He always puts on a fantastic show. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really hope you've enjoyed hearing from Ross Wilson.